I paid for every single detail of my sister's wedding, only to wake up the next morning and find exactly $15,000 missing from our joint account. My husband served me divorce papers less than 24 hours later, acting like it was all just terrible timing. They forgot that verifying expenses is my profession. I kept the one receipt they thought I would throw away, and it tells a very different story. My name is Tessa Morgan. I am 34 years old, and I have lived in Columbus, Ohio, long enough to know that I prefer the predictability of the Midwest to the chaos of anywhere else. I am a woman who finds comfort in straight lines and balanced ledgers. I do not like messes. I do not like ambiguity. In my world, 1 plus 1 must always equal 2, or else someone has made a grave error. This need for precision is why I excel at my job. I work as a senior contract controller for Stonebridge Utility Partners. It sounds dry, and frankly, it is. I spend my days staring at dual monitors, cross-referencing expense reports against approved project budgets for infrastructure development. If a contractor tries to bill us for 500 feet of copper wire when the schematics only call for 300, I am the one who flags it. I am the gatekeeper. I am the one who ensures that the math holds up under scrutiny. My husband, Gavin Hale, used to tell me that my grounded nature was what drew him to me. Gavin is 37, a man who works in insurance and investments, a field that relies as much on charm as it does on data. He has a way of speaking that makes you feel like everything is under control. He is soft-spoken, steady, and handsome in a way that does not demand attention but certainly keeps it. He would often wrap his arms around me after a long day and whisper into my hair, "You are so easy to live with. Tessa, no drama with you. Just peace." I took it as the highest compliment. I did not realize then that easy can sometimes mean easy to maneuver. The disruption to our orderly life arrived in the form of my younger sister, Brielle, at 29. Brielle is everything I am not. She is impulsive, emotional, and terrible with money. When she announced her engagement to Caleb, the plans immediately spiraled out of control. She insisted on a destination wedding in a riverside town in Kentucky, a place that charged premium rates for its rustic aesthetic. The budget was a concept she simply chose to ignore. My mother did not help. She called me incessantly, her voice trembling with that familiar mix of anxiety and expectation. "Tessa, you know Brielle doesn't have the liquidity. The family is tight right now. You're the eldest. You've done so well at Stonebridge. We can't let her look less than, not in front of Caleb's people." So, I agreed. I agreed to pay to save the family face. It is the burden of the competent sibling. The invoices began to flood my inbox. There was the deposit for the venue, which cost as much as a small sedan. There were the flowers, thousands of dollars for arrangements that would die in 24 hours. There was the band, the catering, and the dress. Overseeing it all was a company called Harbor and Vine Events. Their billing was aggressive, and their emails were short. But I paid every single invoice because I wanted the problem to go away. Gavin watched me write these checks with a look of sympathetic frustration. He never told me to stop, but he knew exactly where to press to make me feel foolish. "I support you helping family. Tess," he said one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter. "But don't you think Brielle needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet? You're enabling her. I can't stop now." "Gavin," I replied, rubbing my temples. "The invites are out." "I know." He sighed, shaking his head. "You're just too good. They take advantage of you." It was a week before the wedding when Gavin made a practical suggestion. "Look, instead of moving money back and forth between your savings and checking, why don't we just put the wedding fund into the joint account he asked? It'll be easier for you to track the total hemorrhage of cash in one place." And Tessa turned on the instant transfer feature. Why, I asked, looking up from my laptop. "Because these vendors are vultures," he said. "If a payment lags over the weekend, Harbor and Vine will drop the contract. You know how they are. Better to be safe." It sounded logical. It sounded like he was looking out for me. I transferred the funds. I enabled the settings. I effectively removed the locks from our financial front door because my husband asked me to. I remember closing my eyes that night, telling myself a comforting lie. "It is just a wedding," I whispered to myself in the dark. "Just one more week, then everything will go back to normal." I had no idea that normal was already gone. The wedding day unfolded like a glossy magazine spread that had been left out in the rain, beautiful on the surface, but warping at the edges. It was a spectacle designed for social media feeds, not for the solemnity of a lifetime commitment. The venue was draped in silk and crystals, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a celebration of love and more like a staged production. I did not get to enjoy the champagne or the river view. I spent the reception acting as the unofficial crisis manager, putting out fires that my credit card had fueled. Brielle found me near the catering tent. Her face flushed not with bridal joy, but with the frantic energy of someone losing control of a narrative. She gripped my arm with nails that had been manicured to sharp points. "Tessa, you have to handle the lighting vendor," she hissed, her voice dropping so the nearby guests would not hear. "He claims the overtime wasn't in the initial quote. He is threatening to cut the power before the first dance." "Brielle, I have already transferred the full amount," I said, keeping my voice low. The contract said inclusive. "Just, please," she interrupted, her eyes widening with a mix of desperation and entitlement. "Don't ruin this for me over a technicality. Just pay him the extra $500. I can't deal with this right now. I just can't. I paid him. I always paid him." Gavin drifted through the chaos like a visiting dignitary. He wore his tuxedo with an ease that made other men look uncomfortable. He played the role of the supportive brother-in-law to perfection, shaking hands and charmed the elderly relatives. However, I noticed he spent a significant amount of time hovering near the lead coordinator from Harbor and Vine Events. Her name was Elena, a woman with a clipboard and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They did not look like a client and a service provider. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their body language suggesting a familiarity that predated this weekend. I was fixing a floral arrangement that had tipped over when I saw it. Elena leaned in close to Gavin, whispering something brief into his ear. Gavin did not look surprised. He gave a short, sharp nod and a smile that lasted for a fraction of a second. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a man who had just closed a deal. On the other side of the room, the groom, Caleb Sutter, looked like he was waiting for an execution rather than a toast. He was 32, but under the tent lights, he looked 10 years older. He was not looking at his beautiful bride. He was staring at his phone, his thumb swiping the screen repeatedly, as if refreshing a page that refused to load good news. My mother found me a moment later, clutching a glass of white wine. She looked at Gavin across the room and sighed, a sound of profound relief. "You are so lucky." "Tessa," she said, gesturing vaguely toward my husband. "Gavin really stepped up today. He knows how to manage things. It is a good thing you have him. You know how you are. You are too soft. You would let people walk all over you if he wasn't there to watch the gate." I forced a smile and said nothing. I let her believe that I was the fragile one. As the reception wound down and the band began to pack up their equipment, my professional reflexes took over. It was muscle memory. I gathered the final stack of invoices and charge slips from the coordinator's table. I did not do this because I was suspicious. I did it because I am an auditor. Documentation is how I breathe. I took clear photographs of every scrap of paper with my phone and uploaded them to my cloud storage. Then I saw the final receipt. It was stapled to the back of the catering bill, almost hidden. It was labeled simply as Risk Coordination Services. The amount was exactly $15,000. There was no breakdown of hours. There was no description of what risk was being coordinated at a wedding in rural Kentucky. It was a flat fee, round and clean. I walked back to our hotel room that night, the adrenaline of the day fading into exhaustion. Gavin was already asleep, or pretending to be, his breathing rhythmic and heavy. I took the envelope containing the physical receipts and slid it into the inner pocket of my travel briefcase. I told myself I would ask about the $15,000 in the morning. I assumed it was just another exorbitant fee Brielle had bullied us into paying. I did not know that I had just locked the evidence of my own destruction inside my bag. The morning sun hitting the hotel curtains was sharp and intrusive, but the coldness that settled in my chest had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I sat on the edge of the unmade bed, my phone in my hand, staring at the screen of my banking application. The balance was wrong. It was not a small error. It was a crater. Exactly $15,000 had been transferred out of our joint checking account at 3 in the morning. The recipient was listed as Merrowline Consulting LLC. I had never heard of them. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone across the room. I sat perfectly still, listening to the slow, heavy thud of my own heart against my ribs. It felt like a stone dropping into deep water. My thumb moved automatically to the transaction details. The transfer had not been flagged as fraud because it was authorized using a trusted device and a two-factor authentication code. That meant the bank saw this as a legitimate movement of funds initiated by someone with full access. I looked over at Gavin. He was standing by the mirror, adjusting his watch, looking fresh and rested. "Gavin," I said, my voice sounding flat to my own ears. "There is a transfer here. $15,000 went to a consulting firm last night." "Did you move it?" He did not flinch. He did not look shocked. He barely glanced at me in the reflection of the mirror. "You are probably just reading it wrong." "Tessa," he said, smoothing his shirt. "The app glitches sometimes on weekends. Or maybe it is a hold for the venue." "Stop panicking." "It is not a hold," I said, looking at the timestamp. "It is a completed wire transfer authorized by your tablet." "I'll look at it later," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "I have to take a call from the office. Emergency claim." He stepped out onto the balcony, sliding the glass door shut behind him. I watched him through the sheer curtains. He was not talking to a client. His posture was rigid, and he was listening more than speaking. After 2 minutes, he hung up, took a deep breath, and rolled his shoulders back. It looked like an actor preparing to step onto a stage. When he slid the door open and stepped back into the room, his face had changed. The casual husband was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he was reading from a teleprompter. He walked to his leather satchel, opened it, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the bed next to me. "I was going to wait until we got back to Ohio," Gavin said, his voice steady and devoid of warmth. "But if you are going to start interrogating me about money the second we wake up, we might as well do this now." I looked at the document peeking out of the envelope. It was a petition for divorce. "What is this?" I asked. "It is over." "Tessa," he said. "I filed it electronically yesterday. The physical copies are just a formality. I can't do this anymore. The financial control, the constant monitoring. You check every penny I spend. You make me feel like I am an employee, not a husband. I am suffocating." I stared at him. The $15,000 was gone, and now he was accusing me of being the one obsessed with money. "You transferred $15,000 out of our account while I was sleeping," I said slowly. "And now you are leaving me because I noticed. See, that is exactly it," Gavin said, shaking his head with a look of practiced pity. "You care more about the ledger than the relationship. You are impossible to live with. You verify everything. You audit everything. Well, go ahead. Audit this marriage. It is bankrupt." He grabbed his bag and walked out the door without looking back. I sat there for a long time. The silence in the room was heavy. Slowly, the shock began to recede, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of my profession. He had accused me of financial abuse. He had drained the account to provoke a reaction, to make me look hysterical, to build a narrative that I was controlling and money-hungry. I reached for my travel briefcase. My hands were steady now. I pulled out the envelope I had stuffed with receipts the night before. I found the slip for risk coordination services. $15,000. The exact amount missing from the bank. Gavin thought this was a domestic dispute. He thought he could gaslight me into a settlement. He did not realize what he had actually done. He had created a paper trail. If this is a paper game, I whispered to the empty room, then they picked the wrong opponent. I dialed the number for the bank fraud department before I even zipped my suitcase. The hold music was tinny and irritating. When the agent finally answered, I spoke in the clipped, precise tone I reserve for non-compliant contractors. I need to freeze all outgoing wire transfers immediately, I said, pacing the small hotel room. I also need a log of the last login session, specifically the IP address and the device identifier. The agent hesitated. Ma'am, for the IP address. We usually need a subpoena from law enforcement. I am not asking for the geolocation, I corrected him, keeping my voice level. I am asking for the device ID confirmation to verify if it matches a trusted device on file. If you do not provide this, I will hold the bank liable for negligence in a disputed high-value transfer. He paused, typed something, and then gave me the data. The transfer was approved at exactly 3:14 in the afternoon on Saturday. 3:14. At that exact moment, I was in the bridal suite, steaming the veil while Brielle complained about her hair. My phone was locked in the hotel safe. I checked the device ID against my settings. It was the iPad Pro, the one Gavin used to watch sports highlights, the one that was currently sitting in the passenger seat of his car, presumably halfway back to Ohio. I sent a text to Brielle. Did you know Gavin was leaving? I typed. Did you authorize any payments to Ameriline Consulting? The response took 20 minutes. Tessa, stop, she wrote back. Gavin is stressed. Don't make this about money the day after my wedding. Just let it go for now. She was not surprised. She was managing me. I drove back to Columbus in silence. My mind was racing, analyzing the variables. When I got home, I bypassed the living room and went straight to my home office. I logged into my email client, but I did not look at the inbox. I went straight to the settings. I navigated to the forwarding rules. There it was, a rule created 2 weeks ago. The command was simple. If the sender contains the word bank, mark the email as read and forward it to a generic Gmail account I did not recognize. This was how I missed the transfer notifications. It was a classic embezzlement trick. Someone had been planning this while I was busy paying for flowers. On Monday morning, I walked into Stonebridge Utility Partners at 7 sharp. I went directly to the office of the Director of Internal Compliance. I believe my personal email and devices have been compromised. I told him, I am reporting this to ensure there is no spillover into company data. I want to log this officially. I wanted a third-party timestamp. I wanted to look proactive. I thought I was getting ahead of the problem. 2 hours later, Human Resources summoned me. I walked in expecting a formality about data security. Instead, the HR director, a woman named Karen who usually smiled at me, looked grim. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Tessa, we received an anonymous whistleblower complaint this morning, Karen said, avoiding my eyes. It alleges that you have been pressuring contractors for kickbacks and using company funds for personal expenses. The room seemed to tilt. This was not just a divorce. This was a demolition. This is absurd, I said, my hands gripping the armrests of the chair. Who sent this? It is anonymous, Karen replied. But given the severity, we have to open an investigation. We are placing you on administrative leave pending the audit. We need your badge. I walked out of the building with a box of my personal effects. They were not just taking the $15,000. They were cutting off my income. They wanted me destitute so I could not hire a lawyer. They wanted me too weak to fight. I went home and took out a fresh black notebook. I did not trust the cloud anymore. I wrote down the date. I wrote down the time of the transfer. I wrote down the email rule. Then I opened my laptop, disconnected it from the internet, and created a new folder. I named it Marrowline Timeline. I spent the next 48 hours bleeding money I did not have to hire the protection I did not think I would ever need. I retained a civil attorney named Elias Vance for the divorce, and a separate specialist for the employment retaliation claim. My savings account was evaporating, but I had no choice. I was being hunted, and I needed armor. Vance was a man who wasted no words. He sat in his office, which smelled faintly of old paper and sanitizer, and looked at the limited liability company information I had printed out. Marrowline Consulting is a ghost, Tessa, he said, tapping the paper with a pen. It was incorporated in Delaware 3 months ago. No website, no employees, just a registered agent service. Companies like this are designed to be buckets. They catch water, and then they disappear. I went home and turned my guest room into a war room. I taped the wedding invoices to the wall. I started with the wedding planner, Harbor and Vine Events. Then I pulled up the registration documents for Marrowline Consulting. My stomach turned over. Harbor and Vine listed their business address as Suite 401 in a corporate park in Kentucky. Marrowline Consulting was listed at Suite 402 in the exact same building. They were neighbors. They were likely the same room divided by a piece of drywall. I picked up the phone and called the floral vendor. I kept my voice light, pretending to be a confused bride rather than a forensic auditor. "Hi. I am just reconciling the final budget for the Morgan wedding," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "I have an invoice here for $5,000. I just wanted to confirm that the final balance was cleared." There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of typing. "Ms. Morgan, we were paid in full," the florist said. "But our total contract was only for $2,500. We never charged $5,000. I thanked her and hung up. The math was simple. I had paid $5,000. The vendor received $2,500. The other $2,500 had vanished into the ether, likely funneled straight into the account next door. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was local. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. "Don't talk," a male voice whispered. It was Caleb, Brielle's husband. "Just listen. You don't know the whole story. I just found out. I feel sick. Meet me." We met at a diner 20 minutes later. It was loud, smelling of bacon grease and burnt coffee, the kind of place where people ignored each other. Caleb looked like he had not slept in days. He kept looking out the window at the parking lot. "They made me sign a prenup," Caleb said, his voice low and shaking. Literally 10 minutes before the rehearsal dinner, Brielle was crying. She said there was a debt, a big one, and that someone was going to take care of it, but only if I signed the papers to protect her assets. "What assets?" "We don't have any assets." "Who is the someone?" "Caleb," I asked, leaning in. "I don't know for sure," he said, gripping his coffee mug with both hands. "But Tessa, you need to know about Gavin." I stiffened. "What about him?" "He didn't just meet the wedding planner this weekend," Caleb said, looking me in the eyes for the first time. "I saw them 2 months ago. I was in Lexington for a site visit. They were at a coffee shop, Gavin and that woman, Elena. They weren't flirting. They had laptops out. They looked like they were planning a heist." I sat back against the vinyl booth. The picture was suddenly sharp and terrifying. It was a wedding skim. It was a sophisticated financial operation. They used the chaos of a wedding to inflate invoices, skim the difference into a shell company, and launder the money. And they used my joint account to do it so that if anyone looked closely, my name would be the one on the transaction logs. "They set me up," I whispered. "They needed a financier who would pay without asking questions until it was too late." "I think they are watching us," Caleb said, sliding out of the booth. "I have to go. If Brielle knows I am here." He did not finish the sentence. He just walked out. I drove home, taking random turns, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked dark and uninviting. I walked to the front door and stopped. There was a thick envelope lying on the doormat. It had no postage stamp. It had been hand-delivered. I picked it up. It was a formal legal notice from the law firm representing my company. reminding me of my non-disclosure agreement and warning of litigation if I spoke to the press. It was standard legal intimidation, but the timing was surgical. They knew I was home. They knew I was investigating. It was not just a letter. It was a whisper in my ear saying, "We see you." I stopped crying. Tears are a variable that cannot be quantified, and right now, I needed data that could stand up in a court of law. I treated my life like a failing infrastructure project that needed a forensic audit. The emotional wife was gone. The contract controller had clocked in. My first move was to secure the chain of custody for my evidence. If I'd downloaded files alone, Gavin's lawyers could argue I had altered them. I called Mallory Keene, a former colleague from Stonebridge who had left to start her own compliance firm. She was licensed, bonded, and terrifyingly thorough. "I need you to come over," I told her. "I need a witness to observe and notarize the retrieval of digital assets." "Bring your stamp." Mallory arrived within 40 minutes. We sat at my dining table, and she recorded the screen as I logged into the bank's portal. I requested a formal affidavit regarding the device identifiers and IP addresses used during the weekend. I also requested a server log confirming exactly when the email forwarding rule had been created. "Okay, open the LLC registration for Marrowline again," Mallory said, her pen hovering over her notepad. I pulled up the document. We zoomed in on the signature block. The organizer was listed as G. Hale. It was a lazy alias, just the first initial and last name. However, the contact email address listed for the registered agent was not Gavin's. It was admin at Harbor in Vine. Events. The wedding planner is the administrative contact for the shell company receiving your stolen money, Mallory stated flatly. And G. Hale is the authorized signer. That connects the conspiracy. It gets worse, I said. I opened the PDF of the $15,000 invoice for risk coordination services. At the bottom, there was a digital signature. It was my signature. It was the specific loop I make on the letter T, the sharp angle of the M. It looked authentic at first glance. "Zoom in to 300%, I said. On the screen, the truth revealed itself in pixels. The resolution of the signature was lower than the rest of the document. The anti-aliasing around the ink strokes was jagged. It was a bitmap image that had been pasted onto the PDF, not a signature generated by a stylus or a secure signing platform. "That is a copy-paste job," Mallory said, shaking her head. "Where did they get a high-quality scan of your signature?" I closed my eyes, and the memory from the wedding reception played back in my mind. It was late. My phone was in my purse. Gavin had come up to me, patting his pockets, looking flustered. "Tessa, my battery is dead, and I need to call a car for your aunt," he had said. "Can I unlock your phone for a second?" I had unlocked it. He had walked away for 10 minutes. He did not call a car. He took a photo of a previous contract I had signed, cropped it, and airdropped it to himself. "He stole my identity while I was dancing with his father," I said. My voice cold. I called Elias Vance immediately. We mapped out the next move. We needed a confession, or at least a contradiction that would destroy their credibility. We decided to target the weakest link in the chain, Brielle. "Do not accuse her," Vance instructed me over the speakerphone. "If you accuse her, she shuts down. Ask for help. Play the confused victim. Let her try to explain the lie. People who are lying have to invent details, and eventually, the details clash." I sent Brielle a text message. "I am so confused about this banking error. I wrote, I think my identity was stolen. Can we meet for coffee? I need my sister." It was a trap. We chose a coffee shop that was busy enough to be safe but quiet enough for a recording device to pick up clear audio. I would have a private investigator sitting 2 tables away. I spent the rest of the night preparing my questions. I wrote them down on index cards, arranging them in a specific sequence designed to lead her into a corner. I was not going to ask, "Did you do it?" I was going to ask, "How do we fix this?" Before I turned off the lights, I took a sticky note and wrote 2 sentences on it. I stuck it inside my top desk drawer where only I could see it. "Don't win fast. Win with evidence." Brielle arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes late. It was a power play, a tactic she used often to remind people that her time was more valuable than theirs. She did not look like a sister concerned about my crumbling marriage. She looked annoyed, like someone forced to deal with a tedious errand on her day off. She wore oversized sunglasses and kept her coat buttoned, sitting down across from me with a sigh that was loud enough to turn heads at the next table. Honestly, Tessa, you are making this so much harder than it needs to be, Brielle said, not bothering to take off her glasses. I have a headache. Can we just cut to the chase? I kept my hands folded on the table. The recording device in my purse was running. The private investigator 2 tables away was reading a newspaper. I am just trying to understand. Brielle, I said, keeping my voice soft and trembling slightly. $15,000 disappeared. My husband left me. I just want to know why. Brielle rolled her eyes. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. Look, Gavin is willing to drop the divorce petition, she said. He told me. All you have to do is sign the non-disclosure agreement and the settlement for the assets. He just wants to move on. If you sign, everything goes back to normal. You keep the house, he takes the cash, and you both walk away. But the money went to a consulting firm. I said, feigning ignorance. I don't know who they are. Oh my God, Tessa, stop overthinking it, she snapped, her frustration boiling over. Marrowline is just an intermediary. It is standard for asset reallocation. It is not a big deal unless you make it one. My heart stopped for a beat. She knew the name. She knew Marrowline was a middleman. How do you know that I asked? Looking down at my hands to hide the sharp focus in my eyes. Did Gavin tell you that he's helping me? Okay, Brielle hissed. I had some debts from before the wedding, credit cards. Gavin said if I helped him sort out his finances, he would wipe my slate clean. He is a financial planner. Tessa, he knows how to move things around so nobody gets hurt. So you gave him access? I asked. You gave him the authorization codes for my account. She hesitated, looking out the window, then looked back at me with a mix of defiance and guilt. He said it was temporary. He said you wouldn't fight back. He said you would be too scared of a scandal. He told me, Tessa won't make a scene because she is terrified of losing her job. And he was right. Wasn't he? Look at you. You are terrified. The insult landed with the precision of a sniper shot. They had weaponized my professionalism. They knew I valued my career and my reputation, so they used a smear campaign at work to silence me before I could even scream. He really thinks I am just going to let it go, I asked. Brielle reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was cold. Tessa, look at you, she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness. You are the responsible one. You absorb things, Gavin told me. Don't worry about Tessa. She will be calm. She is always calm. He knows you better than anyone. You will fix the mess because that is what you do. You pay the bills. I looked at my sister. I saw the selfishness that I had enabled for decades. I saw the absolute confidence she had that I would swallow this betrayal to keep the family picture perfect. They thought my silence was weakness. They did not know that silence is also how a predator hunts. I had the admission. I had the link to Marrowline. I had the confirmation of conspiracy. I stood up slowly. I did not finish my coffee. You are right. Brielle, I said, picking up my purse. I am very calm. Thank you for explaining it to me. She looked relieved, thinking she had won. She thought I was going to go home and sign the papers. So you'll sign, she asked. I will handle it. I said. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. I stepped into the cool afternoon air and pulled out my phone. I sent a text message to Elias Vance. It was short and lethal. Got the admission. Moving to the trap phase. The social fallout began before the legal one. Gavin launched his offensive with the efficiency of a seasoned PR manager. My phone began to ping with messages from mutual friends and distant relatives, all cloaked in faux concern. They asked if I was okay, but the subtext was clear. Gavin had told them I was having a breakdown. He had painted a portrait of a wife unhinged by greed, a woman who was ruining her sister's honeymoon over a clerical error. He was not just leaving me, he was isolating me. The attacks on my character did not stop at my social circle. On Wednesday, I was summoned back to the Stonebridge offices. Despite being on administrative leave, the director of internal compliance did not offer me a seat. He stood by the window, holding a printout of an email. We received another anonymous tip. "Tessa," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth he used to show when we discussed quarterly targets. "This one alleges that you have been leaking our preferred contractor lists to competitors for cash. They claim you are selling data." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was not just a smear, it was a career death sentence. If this rumor stuck, I would never work in finance again. "That is a lie," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I want to see the server logs. I want a full audit of my outgoing traffic." "We are looking into it," he replied coldly. "But until then, do not contact any of our vendors." I left the building knowing that Gavin was trying to suffocate me financially. He wanted me desperate. He wanted me to beg. I went straight to Elias Vance's office. We did not cry. We drafted preservation letters. These are legal grenades that warn recipients to preserve all documents, emails, texts, and metadata related to the case, or face criminal charges for destruction of evidence. We sent them via certified mail to Gavin, Brielle, the bank, and the registered agent for Harbor and Vine events. The reaction was immediate. That afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Elena, the wedding planner. Her voice, usually smooth and professional, sounded thin and brittle. "Ms. Morgan, I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding about the invoice," Elena said fast. "We value our reputation. We are willing to issue a partial refund of, say, $5,000 to resolve this amicably. We just need you to sign a waiver releasing us from liability." She was scared. Innocent vendors do not offer $5,000 to make a problem go away. They fight back. "I am not interested in a refund." "Elena," I said, pressing the record button on my external hard drive. "And I do not conduct legal settlements over the phone. Please, we can work this out," she stammered. "I don't want any trouble with the courts. If you want to explain the discrepancy, send it to me in an email," I said, cutting her off. "Put your offer in writing." She fell for it. An hour later, an email arrived. In it, she claimed the $15,000 was for consulting fees that were misallocated and offered the refund. She had just admitted in writing that the money was not used for the purpose listed on the receipt. While I was archiving the email, Caleb sent me a screenshot. It was a text message Gavin had sent to Brielle 2 days before the wedding. "Stick to the script with your mom. Tessa is unstable. She is obsessed with money. We are the victims of her control issues. If we play this right, she will look too crazy to testify." I stared at the screen. The room felt very quiet. I realized then that the $15,000 was not the endgame. It was just the opening move. Gavin did not just want the money. He wanted to destroy my credibility so completely that when we got to divorce court, the judge would see me as an unreliable narrator. He wanted to invalidate my reality. He wanted to win the house, the assets, and his freedom by diagnosing me as the problem. I printed the screenshot. I added it to the timeline. I called Vance, file the emergency motion. I said, "I want a temporary restraining order on all marital assets to prevent dissipation. And I want to file a formal complaint for wire fraud." "Are you sure Vance asked?" "This means war. There is no going back. He tried to take my career. Elias," I said. "He tried to make me look insane. I am not going to fight him in the rumor mill. I am going to drag him into a deposition room." I hung up and looked at the stack of evidence on my desk. I was not going to scream. I was not going to throw things. I was going to wait for the moment when he had to raise his right hand and swear to tell the truth, knowing that I had the receipts to prove every single lie. We secured a date for an emergency hearing regarding the dissipation of marital assets and financial fraud. The judge granted us a slot on Friday morning, giving me exactly 72 hours to assemble a case that was bulletproof. I did not sleep. I treated my dining room table like a crime lab, organizing evidence into binders labeled with specific accounting codes. I had the timeline of the unauthorized access. I had the screenshots of the email forwarding rule. I had the affidavit from the bank confirming the device ID was Gavin's iPad. But I needed more. I needed to know if this was an isolated incident of a desperate husband or something darker. I spent Tuesday night scouring bridal forums and review sites for Harbor and Vine events. I looked for patterns. I found a review from a bride in Louisville from 6 months ago, complaining about unexpected consulting fees that ruined her honeymoon budget. She had attached a photo of her final invoice to the review. I zoomed in until my eyes burned. There, buried in the subtotal, was a line item for Marrowline Consulting. I checked another review. This one from a wedding in Cincinnati. Same complaint, same vague consulting fee, same shell company. My blood ran cold. This was not just a family drama. This was a systematic wedding scam. Gavin and the planner were running a racket where they used the chaotic, high-spending environment of weddings to funnel money from unsuspecting couples, or, in my case, a trusting family member into a hidden account. They were banking on the fact that brides are too stressed to check the math and families are too polite to sue. On Wednesday morning, Gavin blinked. He sent an email to Elias, my lawyer. The subject line was simply settlement offer. He proposed returning the full $15,000 immediately, provided I withdrew the fraud complaint and signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. He wanted to buy my silence because he realized I was getting close to the rest of the scam. He is cornered, Elias told me. Do not sign the NDA, but agree to meet for the financial reconciliation. We need him to admit the transfer happened on paper. We met in a neutral conference room at a mediation center. Gavin looked tired, his perfect suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. He did not look at me. He slid a check across the table. It was written for $15,000. Just take it, Tessa, he said, his voice tight. Take the money. Drop the filing. Let's just get the divorce over with. You don't want to drag Brielle through a public trial. I will accept the return of funds, I said, sliding a document back toward him. But for accounting purposes, I need you to sign this acknowledgement that this payment is a reimbursement for the unauthorized withdrawal made on Saturday. I cannot deposit a check without a documented source of funds. You know how the IRS is. I used his own fear of regulation against him. He hesitated, pen hovering over the paper. He looked at me with a flash of pure disdain. You are unbelievable, he sneered, scribbling his signature. You don't understand how these things work. Tessa, you think everything is black and white. You only know how to scrutinize invoices. You have no vision. My vision is 2020, I replied, taking the paper. He had just signed a confession. He thought he was closing a loophole, but he had just authenticated the fraud. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. It was Caleb. I'm in, Caleb said. I spoke to a lawyer. I'm testifying. I am not going to let them stick me with Brielle's debt while they run off with the cash. You lead. I follow. I sat in my car in the parking lot and looked at the copy of the receipt one last time. I stared at the number. $15,000. It had bothered me from the beginning. Why that specific amount? Why not 20? Why not 10? Then it clicked. I remembered a memo from the risk department at my office about banking regulations. Most banks have an automated internal alert system for transfers that exceed a certain percentage of the account's average daily balance, but they also have hard ceilings for instant clearing without manual review. For our specific bank tier, the threshold for an immediate, no questions asked transfer review was $15,001. They had chosen exactly $15,000 because it was the maximum amount they could steal without triggering a human security review at the bank. It was not a random theft. It was a calculated extraction. And that calculation was going to be their prison cell. The hearing was clinical, devoid of the pageantry Gavin had tried to create in the court of public opinion. He walked into the courtroom wearing a navy suit that signaled humility, playing the role of the battered husband to perfection. Brielle sat behind him, twisting a tissue in her hands, looking wide-eyed and innocent. The third seat at their table was empty. A lawyer informed the judge that the owner of Harbor and Vine Events was unable to attend due to a sudden and convenient medical emergency. Gavin took the stand first. His voice was smooth, practiced, and infuriatingly calm. My wife is suffering from a severe need for control. Your Honor, Gavin said, looking directly at the judge with earnest eyes. She transferred that money herself. She moved it to hide assets, and when I filed for divorce because I could no longer breathe under her financial tyranny, she invented this conspiracy to punish me. She is trying to ruin my reputation because she cannot handle rejection. It was a good performance. If I did not know the truth, I might have believed him. I did not offer an emotional rebuttal. I did not cry. I simply slid a binder across the table to the judge. Your Honor, my lawyer, Elias, said, "We are submitting Exhibit A. This is a verified log from the bank identifying the device used to authorize the transfer. It matches the unique device identifier of Mr. Hale's personal tablet. Furthermore, Exhibit B shows the creation of an email forwarding rule designed to hide bank alerts. The timestamp of that rule creation coincides perfectly with the GPS location of Mr. Hale's device at his office, 3 days before the wedding." Gavin shifted in his seat. The narrative was cracking. And finally, Elias continued, pulling out a printout. "We have Exhibit C, an email received 2 days ago from the wedding planner, offering my client a partial refund of $5,000 in exchange for silence regarding the transaction. Innocent vendors do not offer hush money." Your Honor. The judge frowned, looking from the papers to Gavin. But the final nail came from the back of the room. Caleb took the stand. He did not look at his wife. "Brielle told me about the deal," Caleb said, his voice shaking but clear. "She had significant credit card debt. Gavin promised to wipe it clean if she gave him the login credentials for the joint account and followed his script. He told her that Tessa would never fight back because she was too afraid of losing her job." The room went silent. The judge looked at Brielle, who buried her face in her hands. "This looks less like a marital dispute and more like organized fraud," the judge said, leaning forward. "We have one last thing," I said, speaking for the first time. I held up the original receipt for the risk coordination services. "The signature on this invoice is a forgery. I ran a metadata analysis on the PDF. The layer containing my signature was created 4 years ago. It was copy-pasted from an old tax return. The pixel density does not match the rest of the document." The judge nodded slowly. He struck his gavel with a sound that felt like a door slamming shut on Gavin's future. "I am issuing an immediate temporary freeze on all marital assets," the judge ruled. "I am also referring this evidence to the district attorney's office for an investigation into wire fraud and identity theft. Mr. Hale's request for a disproportionate share of assets is denied with prejudice." Brielle began to sob, a loud, ugly sound of terrified realization. She was not crying for me. She was crying because she knew she was an accomplice. Gavin stood up, his face red, his composure shattering. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are ruining everything over nothing. It was just $15,000. It is nothing to you." The courtroom froze. He had just admitted it. He had just confirmed that the amount was trivial to him, proving he took it. "Sit down." "Mr. Hale," the judge ordered, his voice like steel. The order was finalized within the hour. The $15,000 was to be returned to the account under court supervision. I was granted exclusive use of the marital home during the proceedings. Most importantly, my company received a court-certified letter confirming that I was the victim of financial identity theft, not the perpetrator. The internal investigation at my job was dropped immediately. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Gavin was arguing with his lawyer on the steps. Brielle was sitting on a bench, alone, weeping into her phone. I did not stop to talk to them. I checked my watch. I had a meeting with a new client at 4. I did not win because I am perfect. I won because I kept the receipt. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.